once I got the courage to take my leap and start making choices aligned there, that's my litmus test, and things that allow me to do that are usually a hell yes. And I think setting expectations up front, right? Like, I get that comment all the time. How are you juggling all these things and continuing to deliver? I think it's because of the intentionality around what I'm promising to deliver.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Invictus Mindset Podcast. Today's guest is empowering and protecting others so they can be seen and celebrated for exactly who they are. He's an accomplished Marine, attorney, and business advisor, and he's incredibly intuitive at fixing, and he thinks fast and effectively on the fly. Close friend, I'm excited to dive down this rabbit hole with you today, Mr. Justin Nahama. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me. I wish I could bring you around with me everywhere and just do that.
That is only a
awesome
piece of the puzzle, though. Like, you have such a resume. Like, for those of you watching, I've got a page of notes here, but this does not do this man justice. And so I'm really excited to kind of share your story with the world. Like, you have so many different layers, as we chatted about briefly in our pre-interview conversation. Like, your hands are in so many different buckets. And more importantly, man, you're so focused on positively impacting the world. And I really admired that about you as well. But, before we get into that, like, thank you for making time for us to come over and spend some time with you, man.
It's a highlight. And, it's very easy to find excuses to not make time. I think we're all guilty of it a little bit, but been waiting to chat with you for a bit and grateful we have a few hours together.
Absolutely. And, you have such close ties to the Invictus community. You're a very close friend with Invictus founder CJ Martin. And before you got into your different chapters with law, with business, with innovation, with science, and with tech, you were a CrossFitter, man. Like, you were a big time athlete. One of our longtime coaches, Nick Hawks, actually taught your level 1. And, you played some lacrosse as a youngster and then found your way into the CrossFit space. What was that kind of like?
CrossFit kind of saved me. I know a lot of people say that, but, at the time, this was 2004 when I found CrossFit, and it was a significant transition in my life. I had gone to school to study psychology, wanted to work with kids. My dad was supposed to be in one of the towers on 9/11 and hit pretty close to home. And so I wound up doing the whole Marine officer thing. And when I was just about to go on active duty and get commissioned, had finished OCS, the Marines asked me if I wanted to go to law school and become a JAG. I said, no, thank you. They said, we hear you, you're doing it anyway.
Oh, wow.
And so wound up going into the reserves and did law school in Boston. And when I was there, it was very difficult for me because I was watching my friends start to deploy, come back and forth from overseas, and I was sitting in a library, unhappy, very different than playing Division I lacrosse. And I was in a gym in Beacon Hill, Brookline Village in Boston. There's an OG CrossFitter, Neil Thompson, who came up to me. He's like, as with most of our first stories, try this thing called CrossFit. This would have been in, late 2004.
Okay.
And so the first workout, it was Diane, I think.
Okay.
And so
21-15-9 deadlifts and handstand pushups.
Yeah. And the handstand pushups went well for 5 of them, and then it got ugly fast. And so I was hooked, and then came Fight Gone Bad, and then came immersing myself into the old CrossFit.com and getting into the nutrition with Barry Sears and reading the old CrossFit Journal articles. And so it really became my outlet in community. I didn't know how much it would impact me down the road, but I was really struggling in law school at the time, watching my buddies go down range, and CrossFit became my outlet and absolutely fell in love with the community.
That's very cool. What was that like when you're in the library and you obviously are doing what you're asked to do? But did you at the time have the long-term vision of all right, this is going to pay off later? Because obviously now, what did Matthew McConaughey say? It's it's a mystery looking forward, but science looking back. Yeah. And it's for you in the moment, as a youngster, it's hard to see that. But now looking back, you're like, man, I'm glad I did that.
I love the Steve Jobs kind of commencement address on that too, where he talks about kind of connecting the dots, looking backwards. I had no fucking idea what I was doing. None whatsoever. I was treading water. I had been used to having that physical outlet through sports primarily, and I didn't have it, and I was watching the community, do what I signed up to do it, and I kind of felt like I was on the sidelines. I was coaching lacrosse to stay connected. But CrossFit was my medicine at the time to stay focused. And, the firms that I worked at would probably kill me for saying this, but like, I did not particularly care for most of law school.
Yeah.
As far as the content and everything else, like until, and this is kind of serendipity and alignment, the guy who ran the league that I was coaching lacrosse in, a boys lacrosse team, was a really well-known federal prosecutor.
Oh,
and
okay.
He was doing like badass, like Whitey Bulger level, like public corruption at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so he had completed OCS for the Marine Corps back in the day. This was like late 70s, but didn't accept his commission because he got an opportunity. I think he got a full boat ride to like UPenn or some fantastic law school.
Yep.
So he was very interested in mentoring me and staying in touch because I was kind of doing what he thought he was going to do. And he took me under his wing. He taught me trial practice, and you know me well enough to know how much I love empowering people by really teaching them how to tell their story and find their voice.
Yeah, you're very, very good at that. What the irony of this story is, typically like you give what you kind of need. And it sounds like that's what this gentleman did for you, is he gave you what he kind of needed himself. And that kind of set like this launching pad for the rest of your life when you felt like kind of lost. I'm doing something that I'm not really fulfilled doing. What was a major motivating factor for you as to like, I'm going to keep putting one foot after the other here in law school, even though I'm not really enjoying it? Was it the connection with this gentleman, or was it something else?
I think it was just really trying to find my tribe. Like I knew I was getting like closer with the Marine Corps. I knew that it was kind of a holding pattern. I was going to go back on active duty and was starting to build a community within CrossFit. But I knew that if I worked my ass off, that I would find the right tribe. And
that's
people.
So important. I think that's sometimes often overlooked, is just the, what do they say? You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And the tribe is just so crucial, man. Knowing that somebody cares, knowing that somebody is there, even if they don't say anything and they're holding space for you. The sheer presence of having somebody knowing that they have your back, I think enables you the tools in your toolbox to really like keep pushing. And I think that's really cool that you emphasize that, early on, and it obviously is, catered into a lot of things you're doing now. With regards to like CrossFit specifically, what was your attachment to sport? What was your lacrosse background like? What were some of the sports things that your parents involved you in? Like, how did you really find the tools in your toolbox to partake in CrossFit right away?
I think it was, sports were primarily my outlet growing up. I played probably everything at one point and then did pretty well in soccer and lacrosse. As you get older, they kind of become you have to pick because of the time commitment usually. And then it got funneled down into lacrosse. And that combined with just taking care of the people that I loved. I'm an older brother, my younger sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of the intersection of like leadership and, putting out physically, and hitting it hard and realizing that you're going to get out what you put in has always just made sense to me. And I think what you shared before about community is dead on, with one asterisk, where if you have a community and you're part of a community that doesn't see you for exactly who you are, then it flips, and then it's like a little bit of the oxygen is removed from the room and you're out of alignment.
Very true.
And so I think it's critical to be in a community that sees you for who you are. And I'm sure we'll get into some of the CrossFit litigation from over the years that I helped with, but you had all of these folks looking at CrossFit during its kind of explosive growth years, and they missed the mark. They were focused on the movements and the mechanics, but they missed the whole community aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with CrossFit and through any type of physical medium, it strips away the bullshit.
Yeah.
We by working that hard in a community setting, we're left with ourselves. We're responsible for what we put up on the whiteboard and what we're thinking. And so, I think one of the reasons why I resonated with the community so much early on is because it kind of stripped me down to the real me.
Mm-hmm.
I had no one else to blame but myself for my, first 10 scores on Fight Gone Bad. And you're responsible.
I love that description. I wrote a blog post, I think 4 or 5 years ago, titled "You Can't Hide in the World of CrossFit." And what the meaning behind that was like, your score is your score. right? And like, obviously you try to honor that and move well and not cheat, not, cut corners within your score. But I think it's really cool that you learned that early on, because that extends to the tribe. You mentioned the tribe not necessarily always honoring you for you, but sometimes people don't know that. They don't know themselves. It's very hard to sit with yourself. It's very hard to peel back the layers of yourself and journal and laugh and cry. And, stillness is the key, as Ryan Holiday said. And most people want to deflect and distract and find all kinds of mediums, whether that's social media or alcohol or altered states of consciousness, to not sit with themselves. And that, honestly, for those of you listening, is my favorite part about Justin Nahama, is you helped me learn that that's okay. And I think sometimes when you look at like a Marine that's very stoic, that has this amazing CrossFit background, that's doing very well in law school, it's doing very well as a parent, doing well as a man, sometimes you think like, oh, this person's stoic. This person's not going to show the emotional vulnerability. And I think you and I really resonated on the concept of yin to yang. You need the hard with the soft. Will you talk about that a little bit? And like, where did you learn that concept? And where did you grant yourself the permission to be like, hey, being a strong male also has some of these characteristics that are sometimes viewed from a societal perspective as feminine?
It's a great question. I think I kind of got a head start because very close with my family and, shared a bathroom with two younger sisters, which was its own trauma over the years. Love you both. And so I grew up around very, very strong women, and so knew how important that energy was to kind of take care of your team and take care of your tribe. I think to answer your specific question, I kind of learned this the hard way over the course of 25, 30 years. And now it's easier for me to articulate because I'm doing more in the community. But I think it was making peace with the fact that like suffering is part of life. And kind of those hardships, I know for myself, I made a lot of mistakes in the past, and I'm certainly guilty of turning to alcohol and this escapism and all of those things. But for some reason, I kind of had it in my head that like there is a path to have that all of the time. And, I think, based on that, I don't think I know that based on the times that I've really gotten the shit kicked out of me during my life, those were the greatest learning points. And when you pick yourself and dust yourself off, and realize that life is going to have those like ebbs and flows and ups and downs, and a community who stands with you and supports that and celebrates that, to me is a game changer. And it's not easy to find. And you shared a great point about how, and I feel really, really strongly about this. It's part of what we do at the Honor Foundation. It's part of our focus for the Chopra Foundation now. It's giving people the tools to look internally. Because I feel like we're taught so much, during life about what it is that, what is our title? How much money are we making? We're looking outside for validation. And I think that's also a double-edged side of sport, right? Where when you look at the needs of, for example, transitioning professional athletes, year one, and a transitioning Navy SEAL or Marine Raider or Green Beret, their needs are similar. Their stories are different. The communities they came from are different. But so much of those high performers, so many of them are focused on getting validation from the outside world. And I think we've all heard some version of it's about the journey, not the destination. But that's like really, really, really accurate.
Yeah.
So it's when we tie our sense of self-worth to the wins and then are devastated by the losses, I think we miss the process. And as you and I have talked about many times in the past, life isn't linear. When we go from, an athletic career or whatever it is where there's pretty well-defined wins and losses, and then we get into life and it's like, holy shit, like, am I doing this thing right? There's not a scorecard for it all because there's so many different dimensions internally and externally that we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's such a great point that you make. And I think that is groomed or carved into our headspace when we're children in school, because there is the ranking system. A is good, F is bad. All right, that's what you're taught when you're young. And then you come to kind of realize like, oh, wow, it's not necessarily about the grade. It's about who did I become in the pursuit of trying to, learn the subject material to make it long-term applicable to, humanity. And, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but I do want to mention it a little bit. You briefly mentioned the Honor Foundation. Our close friend, Joe Musselman, is the original founder of that. And correct me if I'm wrong. I may be bastardizing this, but I'm pretty sure that that was basically a gateway. It was a bridge for special forces to assimilate into the modern day world and to give them the tools in their toolbox to have a network, to have education, to recognize and be empowered to realize that they have transferable skills. And, I used the example of special forces with the Honor Foundation, but that's the same thing with professional athletes. A lot of these athletes don't know, what do I do next? I played the sport my whole life. And it's like, press pause for a minute. Realize that all of those skills, teamwork, communication, being on time, trying your best, trying to work hard, trying to be innovative, all those things translate over here into the business world too. And I think I have it down here where it's like lessons learned and lived in military service, like leadership, teamwork, competitive spirit, mission orientation, and ambition are the same attributes needed for success in business. That's pulled from Forbes magazine. And that really hits the nail on the head with transferable skills for athletes, for parents, for whatever hat you wear. It typically translates to something else. And sometimes that's very hard to see when you're in the smoke. And, you definitely have lived that very specifically. And so going back to your story and your journey, you're in law school. You're not really enjoying it. You're kind of coaching lacrosse on the side. You had a friend introduce you to CrossFit where you found this outlet for yourself. What kind of came next?
So got through law school and the bar. And then
was the bar only, was it state oriented at the time? Okay.
Yeah. So
was that in Boston?
Correct. So Massachusetts. Okay. So to be a federal prosecutor or attorney in the military, you just have to be the member of the bar of any state. Gotcha. So I took Massachusetts. Not a fun summer studying because I'm not a great test taker. True story. I'm going to out myself here, but I think this is in alignment with what you're talking about, where I am a tragically poor test taker. And so
me too.
When the Marines sent me to, told me to go to law school, I took the LSATs, did not do well. And I started off at the law schools are ranked into 4 tiers, 4 being the lowest, tier 1 being the highest. I squeaked into a school, like one school, and I was fine with it. Didn't really want to be there anyway, but figured I'd check the box and then come back on active duty and do what I needed to do. And it wasn't until that federal prosecutor took me under his wing and I started really working my ass off once I kind of got my head right that I was able to transfer to a top 20 tier 1 school. And so fast forward, as I was lucky enough to work at 2 of the larger firms in the world and at one point help run their associate hiring process.
Wow.
And I had all these young studs and studettes like coming in with like, if they knew my LSAT score.
Hold on, did you just say studettes?
Studettes.
I love that.
Like, they're like, so what's like your secret, like to do well and become a partner at a big firm? And I'm like, shit, like I came in through a side door. You are way more qualified than I ever was, at least from like a testing perspective. And so I share that because I strive to be a top performer, but we have our strengths and weaknesses, and testing isn't one of them for me. And so, I've been recognized based on the law school I graduated from, and I'm very proud to have graduated there. But I'm equally proud of where I started because I feel like it was super scrappy there. Mm-hmm. Like you had to do well, you had to be hungry, because there wasn't as many job opportunities. And so that kind of set me on this path of moving a little quicker. And then fast forward, back to passing the bar, I get orders to the basic school. In Quantico, all Marine officers have 6 months of leadership, entry-level weapon systems, training to every Marine's a rifleman. Then I got orders out to San Diego, and this is where like the CrossFit stuff really came full circle. I did my L1 at, I think it was early 2009, mm-hmm. or maybe late 2008 at USD. Nick, Andy Stumpf, all these OGs were
Andy Stumpf. He's awesome.
Andy's amazing. Yeah.
The first time I ever skydived was with Andy Stumpf, and he did the wingsuit, and I was like, man, this guy is awesome.
That's badass. Yeah,
cool.
The record that he set and everything, mm-hmm. Super impressive.
I gotta have him on, man. I gotta interview him for sure.
I would love to watch that interview off, like between like both of you guys.
It's so fun.
But so him and Craig Admonson was an initial like CrossFit OG as well. And when I was there, they knew that I was a Marine and I was just stepping into being a attorney and federal prosecutor for the Marine Corps. They said, hey, this dude I know named CJ is opening a gym tonight. He used to be a lawyer. Come with me. And this was back when like, now people are doing what, like back-to-back Frans. And this was like glory days where you do one Fran and can't move for a week.
Yeah.
And so, we had done, Fran after doing, 2 hours of like holding the bottom squat position, crippled. And I go and walked in on Invictus's opening night and met CJ out of the gate and was blown away by the courage that he had for having spent time at like the gold standard big firm. I was not there yet. This was like first like legal job for me. So I didn't know how much we'd have in common until later on. But it was really cool to be part of that like opening night at the downtown building.
That's so cool. It's also just rad to see the alignment and the synergy of like, you and I've talked a lot about like taking the leap. And, a lot of people listen to our very first episode with CJ where he tells a little bit of his story, being this, big time lawyer and then realizing like, I'm actually not fulfilled doing this. I want to do this other thing. And the courage to take that leap, realizing that like in a capitalistic world, monetarily, it may not be the biggest return on investment, but like pick your monetary value. Maybe it's not monetary, but maybe it's, you're getting so much in return of providing opportunities for people of, fulfillment and trying to help people who are in low points develop a relationship, a community, empowerment to then go become the best versions of themselves. And Invictus is just a fitness facility that really is a vessel for people to do that. And you've, in your own way, done something very similar, which is very, very cool. So once you kind of got aligned with him, what was that original conversation like? Because I'm sure like you guys both kind of saw elements of yourselves in the other.
Yeah.
So what was that first like conversation like, and how did that blossom into a relationship and the roots in your CrossFit career?
You just meet, when you meet someone just like when you and I met, or you can disagree with me in front of your whole like following base, that like we met and I was like, I really like you. Like I want to like hang out and get to know you more. And
well, it's just so fascinating because I roll into Sundance. I don't know anybody there. I'm familiar with you because your picture's all over the Invictus walls and I've heard stories about you. But I felt this hand on my shoulder and it's Joe. Joe introduces me to you and it's like, I felt like I knew you for years before that moment. And I was like, this is going to be a friendship and a relationship that lasts a lifetime, like right off the bat, before even any words were spoken. Super cool, man.
Feeling was mutual, and that is my answer because you said it better than I could for how I felt when I met CJ for the first time. And then, the CrossFit world was really just like blossoming at that point in time. Games was a super casual thing at Dave's Ranch. And it was fun to watch from behind the scenes, like CJ's vision. And you and I were talking about it earlier about like, where do you prioritize profit and purpose?
Yep.
And most of us choose whether we call it profit or making money or chasing shiny objects. I feel like the world kind of teaches us to focus on profit first. And it takes courage to make the leap. And the analogy I love to use is in one of the Indiana Jones movies, I think it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he's like has to cross this like huge, like just like trench, right, to get across to the other side, and there's no bridge. And so he has to have the courage to take that leap or first step, and he gets there, and there's like a whole walkway. And what I've found, and I've been lucky enough to be in communities where I've been inspired by the Joe Musselmans of the world who have done this, is they take the leap. Right? They have the courage to know that if that purpose is aligned, the profit's gonna follow. And I feel like when you meet people who are on that journey, just like CJ was when he made his shift from a huge securities litigation practice to opening up a gym before it was like a thing, that's courage. He saw the value and was inspired to build a community, and he hasn't sold out. I've watched Invictus like from over the years, and he's held true to his core values. And one of my favorite questions or kind of rhetorical questions that I've heard in the past few years is, for most of our jobs, how can we leave a different person when we show up? Right?
Wow.
Like, why is that? And I think that there's a movement happening right now where I have the utmost respect for nonprofits. I'm part of several and they're near and dear to my heart. But I think the whole concept of conscious business, in terms of what we do, how we treat our people, is going to be the path to really, change the script on innovation and wellness and everything in between.
Yeah, you definitely have my wheels spinning a little bit right now. It's this shifting culture where I think back in the day, like you would ask somebody like, what is your mission as a business? And people were always about the customer. It was this conversation around the customer's always right, this, that, and the other. But I think there's a little bit of a shift now where it's like, it's about the employee a little bit, because the employee is now going to do a better job managing the customer. And so it's really like zooming out a little bit to realize that, like, you know, these higher level, you know, executives are actually not managing the business, they're managing people. And then those people are managing other people, and then those people are actually managing the customer. And so if up here you're skipping these middle people and you're just worried about the customer, well, now these people's fulfillment and innovation and creativity just gets, you know, tossed in the back. And so I think you hit the nail on the head there with a very, very cool analogy. So you met CJ. Your story is kind of evolving gradually for people to kind of see, witness, and really create imagery around it. How are you so damn good at CrossFit, man? Like, you clearly like made a name for yourself. You made regionals a few times, and like, you know, what lessons were learned and what was the value system for you in the sport of CrossFit?
I think when we air this, we should like actually like live stream and do a split screen of CJ's like blood pressure.
Yeah.
When you call me good at CrossFit,
Yes.
from over the years. You know, it was luck as far as timing goes with where I was. I was on active duty. I had the time to carve out, you know, to some degree, like for my fitness. And it was when, you know, regionals was just getting competitive. And so, you know, I was lucky enough to compete on the Invictus Games team 3 times, 2009, 10, and 12. I think we finished top 5 each time.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you, man. The first time was at the ranch, which was really cool. It was
awesome.
Last year at the ranch. And I remember one time, like this was when like doing like 10 double unders in a row was badass. And so I was in my like New Balances, my board shorts, Greg Glassman sitting there. And I didn't know him personally at the time, but I did like 10 and then looked at him. He's like, keep going. I was like, okay. And it was the last chipper, and Sage Bergner was, you know, finished, you know, getting us across the finish line there.
That's so cool.
But the first year that CJ actually did tryouts, like to make the team, I didn't do well. And there was one spot left on the team, and he had like a final workout. It was at the very far left corner of, it was like a barbell complex of like, I think it was like a Grace spin-off with pull-ups in between. So I think it was like 10 135-pound thrusters, clean and jerks, and snatches or overhead, you know, squats or something. And I did really, really well. And, you know, beat the other person. I don't remember who it was who was trying to get on the team and got on the team. And then, you know, the rest was history, and was lucky enough.
I want to bookmark you there for a moment.
Yeah.
Something that really resonates with me in the way you're storytelling right now, which is you don't remember the movements. And I think sometimes when we are in the workout, the movements mean everything. But then when you look back on it, it's not about the movement. It's about the effort. It's about, you know, what did we go through in that moment? And I think that's a very important note for people to take away with, like a little nugget for them, where like we obsess over sometimes the specifics or the nuances, but it's like, no. Zoom out. Sit with this for a moment. What is the objective? And just like really conceptually understanding that a little bit, because it's like the movements don't necessarily matter, right? It's the lesson. And I think you depicted that very well in your storytelling.
I think it's a great point in the sense of, you know, what actually helps us to like break through these like self-imposed walls, right? Like you look at, let's go back to Fran, for example, right? Where like a sub 3 Fran was like superhero level, you know, for a while. And then now it's like sub 2, you know, and what takes an athlete from doing it broken to unbroken. And yes, there's like a physical, you have to be able to, you know, move the weight component to it. But I believe the majority of it's mindset, you know, and in that particular like qualifier to get on the team, it was like, I'm either going out of here like in an ambulance or, you know, or on the team. So it wasn't an option to like not do well. And I think, you know, there's probably healthier ways to like develop that mindset. And I'll never forget Heidi, who you mentioned earlier. You know, I think it was the second year when games got bigger and Reebok got involved, and we went to Carson, where she brought in this book on Buddhism, you know, and we're sitting there and there's a bunch of Marines and SEALs and athletes. We're like, what is this hippie shit? She's like, shut up and read it. and so by Pema Chodron, living beautifully in times of uncertainty and change. And I was like hooked, like out of the gate. And I'm like, what is this like Buddhism, woo-woo, whatever stuff, but there was something that I just knew to be true in the way that she talks about suffering, back to your earlier point, and how that applies like in those moments for fitness or the other things that we do. That amazing point that you mentioned early, kind of like the connective tissue through business and life and fitness, I think is really our headspace, right? Like how we're feeling going through those different like layers, in our journey, and how we choose to show up for them, which version of ourselves is showing up, and how we treat ourselves through those processes. I just happen to love the CrossFit and the physical outlet because it's pretty quick. Like what you have one day and which you don't. And again, like I said earlier, there's no one left to blame. So I feel like the gift that CrossFit gave me was kind of peeling off all of the bullshit and excuses, bringing me right to the present moment, and just so happened to find an absolutely incredible community through luck, through the timing of my orders with the Marine Corps, through Greg and I, Greg Amundsen and I chatting at the level 1 and him inviting me. I mean, you look back to that, connecting the dots, and there's so many like small moments that you realize took your life in a totally different direction. And so feel very lucky and grateful that all of those dots connected for me at that point in my life. And then, from there on.
Yeah. The way you're describing all this, I feel like I'm watching a movie. It's really cool, but I also, I want to harp on a concept of miracles are made in moments. And I think sometimes we don't give respect to the mundane. And I think we should all strive to be masters of the mundane and really realize that that casual conversation with the person at the coffee shop matters, right? And like, you're not doing it with the intent of trying to reap benefit. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Put your grocery cart away. I had a funny conversation with somebody the other day of like, hey, if we incentivized people to put their grocery cart away, like you put it away and a quarter pops out.
I love that.
How many people would do it? So many people. But what if the incentive was do the right thing because it's the right thing? And whether it's karma, whether it's luck, whatever it is, it's like, I think it's character, right? Like you're gravitated by energy. At the end of the day, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I'm gravitated to you. You're gravitated to me. There's something there. Maybe we can't describe it. Maybe it is woo-woo. But it's also like it's character-driven. It's value-driven. It's work ethic-driven. It's impact-driven. That sounds like a pretty cool 5 people to spend some time with. And so, I don't know, I do think that there's something to that with regards to like, maybe every moment isn't this Instagram highlight reel, but those little moments add up to be big moments. And it turns out it highly impacted the rest of your life, which is very, very cool. I also want to say on air that you are a liar because you said you're not a good test taker. And in theory, that last workout against whoever the person was to make it on the team was a test. And you performed very well. So maybe you don't perform well in these formality style tests, but in that particular experience, you performed very, very well.
This is why I need to bring you with me everywhere. So thank you for all of the trauma associated with my LSATs for fixing that in 9 seconds. I appreciate it.
With regards to test taking, though, it's such a fascinating thing because it's like you're measured by your answers to an exam. And I don't know how much I like that. I feel like there's a subjective and an objective conversation that can be had there, but it's very fascinating because I'm a horrible test taker as well. But if you ask me to go coach athletes in a certain, environment, I could probably figure it out pretty well. There's emotional intelligence, there's understanding human movement and biology and physiology. There's a lot to unpack there that you don't see on an exam. And I think you're very similar, like the tools that you have in your toolbox and the intuition and your ability to connect with people creates trust, creates a safe space. That's not measured on an exam. And I think for some people, they place so much value on like the ranking system. If they get anything from this conversation, I hope it's that, And so once you kind of finished up that CrossFit career, was it like a little bit of a lull in identity? Like, what comes next? I've been this athlete for these last few years. Like, I kind of did the law thing, but what was like that next chapter for you? What did that look like?
One of the ways that CrossFit continued to play a significant role is I had been in San Diego for a few months, and then I had to go to another Marine training school back in Newport, Rhode Island, Naval Justice School. It's like advanced training for all military lawyers. And so had met CJ, had my level 1, CrossFit again was like kind of my like outlet at the time as a Marine, and was loving the Invictus community. And I had to go spend a few months in Newport, Rhode Island. And so I was there, and they were doing this trial advocacy training where, what is it, like Talladega Nights with Ricky Bobby, where he's talking and he's like doing all these things with his hands. They record you during training, you watch it back with an instructor, and then they give you feedback so you get better. So I do my training, I go into the instructor, it's just like racked out war hero. I was like, damn, like trying not to stare like at all of his ribbons.
My eyes are up here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking right here. I'm not looking right there. And so, he's like, have you ever recorded yourself doing anything before? I'm like, let me tell you about CrossFit, and just like went in about like learning muscle ups and snatching and all the things. He doesn't say a word. And we finish, the instruction period. He was a great instructor. Then the next day at the gym, I see him, we were doing a Karen. And we're there, and we both got kicked out of the gym for making noise, and we start laughing. And it was Dale.
150 wall balls for time, get kicked out of the gym.
It was Dale Saran, the CrossFit's first general counsel.
Oh wow!
And so started, we kept in touch, and as I started to compete with CJ, I would see him at all the CrossFit stuff. I don't think there was regionals for a few years until like 2000, maybe 10, and then 12.
Okay.
But would see him around town and started to get to know all these amazing people. Jimmy Letchford, who was basically CrossFit's chief marketing officer, still a really dear friend. And if he survives his wife, not killing him for going back to a recon unit at like 40 years old, like he's a dude you should have on the podcast. He is a badass. Sure. But CrossFit stayed apart. And so when I transitioned out of the military at the time, I had, young kids, was a single dad at that point in time. Dale had introduced me to Greg, and they were super generous. And as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, knowing nothing about private practice and really business at that point, I started getting a bunch of work from CrossFit. And that was really meaningful for my career, and was lucky enough to spend, a lot of time at a big law firm. But primarily, I got to protect a community that I love dearly and gave me so much during its, explosive growth years.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned briefly being a single dad. You went through a little bit of a challenging point in your life where you went through a divorce. That's something that we don't wish for anybody. It's a very challenging thing. You're trying to figure out your life. You're trying to figure out her life. You're trying to figure out everything in between. And, you're also trying to figure out your career life. What was that moment like? What were some of the tools in your toolbox, and what was traveling through your headspace?
I mean, in one capacity, it feels like a big failure from my perspective, like, where, how did I not get this right? And I look at the things that I didn't do well, in the relationship, and taking ownership of that. You kind of learn that one the hard way. That's not the fairy tale that people set out to, to be divorced or to be a single parent.
But it's real.
And it's very common. And I think for me, kind of, the biggest part was I didn't know myself well enough at that point in time, to build a long-term, like healthy, thriving, grow together relationship. I'm very lucky in the sense where my parents have been married for over 40 years. We were like the Brady Bunch growing up, and like the cool family where people would come over for barbecues and go on vacation with us. But my parents were old school and didn't have the tools to really prioritize their relationship, where my dad was working a ton and my mom was with us and then went back to school as a teacher. And so, it wasn't cool at the time to like date your spouse, back then. You were providing for your family first. And so, for me, I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that I made, which, wasn't really understanding that when kids get involved and everything else, that you really do need to prioritize that relationship. But I also got really lucky because my ex is an amazing person, and we've been able to really flawlessly co-parent, for the last, like 9 or 10 years now, and so most people aren't that lucky. But I feel very fortunate because, again, not fun putting the kids through that process. They were both very young, but they're both fiercely loved in 2 homes, and it's all they've really known. And so at the end of the day, a painful learning lesson. But on the other side of it, I feel really grateful and lucky that the kids are loved and safe in 2 homes.
Yeah. And the point that I want to make in sharing this element of your story is it's real. It's authentic. There are peaks and valleys in every single story. But more importantly, you and Joe helped me understand that the most successful people are comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. I can only imagine what that conversation or conversations was like, and not fun, but moved the needle in the right direction for both of you and optimized the upbringing of your beautiful children. And I think that's a very important note for people to take away from your story, because it's not easy to do certain things, but sometimes when you sit with it and you realize, like, what do I want? What does she want? What is the most optimal scenario here? It enables you to live a truly authentic life versus, a masked and fabricated life. And I think Jim Carrey hit the nail on the head where he said, depression is basically your body and your brain's avatar to not really want to play that role anymore. It wants to unmask what's been masked. And, had you stayed or she stayed, like, it wouldn't have been as authentic. And I think it wouldn't have been as this maximized, fulfilled life as you guys are both flourishing and living now. So just wanted to take a moment to really thank you for sharing that emotional vulnerability, because I know that's not easy for you.
No, it's my pleasure. And, I with friends and my sisters and everyone, when they ask me, I'm not sure I'm in the position to give relationship advice, but what I tell them is, most of us focus, like you mentioned earlier, on that highlight reel. And rather than really like doing the work, to realize like, what is the glue that's going to hold this together when we get tested in life? And to me, things like, how do you navigate conflict?
Yeah.
Those things where you just have to live enough life with someone and have the courage to hold yourself accountable. It's almost always a two-way street for, what, I brought to the table, and my part in things not working out. And, it sucks, but, sometimes pain is the greatest teacher. And, we mentioned earlier the frequency of authenticity. One of the things that I'm really passionate about changing is giving people the tools so they can be more proactive about that rather than reactive.
Yeah.
When we look at the things that really like shake us down to our core, and it doesn't matter how much money you make or your title or what kind of car you drive, it's usually some type of traumatic event, right? Like loss of life of a family member or friend, a divorce, something with your kids. And that I challenge that, right?
Yeah.
I challenge that and think that there's another path where if we can figure out these practices and have communities that support us when we're up and when we're down, there is a way to live a life like aligned on that frequency of authenticity, which just opens up so many beautiful relationships and opportunities and synergies.
Yeah, for sure. You really described what popped in my brain was just the word hope, right? Like changing the narrative around I'm this way because of said trauma, but then with the concept of hope, really leveraging the crack in that door to get inside and realize like, yeah, that trauma happened, but it doesn't have to define who I am as a human being. It just served a moment in time, and we can catalyze or use that moment to really positively impact rather than it serve as like this bag of rocks or weight vest that doesn't allow us to spread our wings and fly. And I think that's really what you have done. And going back to our conversation around CrossFit, now you're connected when you're rubbing elbows with some of these really innovative, early on OGs within the CrossFit space. What was that early relationship like, and how did you get involved with the litigation associated with former CrossFit owner and CEO Greg Glassman?
I mean, it was kind of like a dream come true at the time, right? Where like I loved the community personally, was still competing in it, had done so much for me, and then when I was a young litigator at a big firm, I had the opportunity to protect the community. So I started off with a few like small matters like here and there with people trying to like knock off the CrossFit trademark. There was one dude who bought like 300 CrossFit domain names and was trying to like strong arm affiliates into paying like a few $1,000 for them. And so I basically got to come in and like fix problems to protect the affiliate community. And then things kind of culminated with this NSCA litigation, which goes back many years where it was the first purportedly peer-reviewed study quantifying CrossFit's injury rate, and it was bullshit. They made it up, and it was very cool to get to work with Greg to see, despite what a lot of folks had to say, working with him in the executive team. My orders were to protect the affiliate community at all costs, and that's what we did.
Yeah, I think what you did is really fascinating because as somebody that's worked at a university and understands the National Strength and Conditioning Association, or NSCA, it's very fascinating. We see it a lot in modern day stuff with a lot of the varying COVID protocols, and I think we're seeing it a lot on podcasts as well. Where, I'll use Joe Rogan as an example. Long form versus short form conversations. Short form, you can pull snippets and you can manipulate the actual context. Long form, you actually can see the body language, the dialogue. You can't hide as much. You're more authentic. You're real. And it's so fascinating to me because I felt like the NSCA pulled some things from their perspective of CrossFit. And rather than seeking to understand, asking appropriate questions, observing the methodology and the application of that methodology, they just saw it as a business rival and an opportunity to try to chase dollars or the shiny object. And I mean, at the end of the day, what's the goal? Use fitness as a tool to positively impact the world. Help decrease or increase certain health biomarkers so that people can live a higher quality of life and not, drain their bank account paying medical bills. That sounds like a pretty good life to me. And it's a very interesting nuance there where, at the time, CrossFit's up and coming. They're kind of doing this really unique thing where they're combining all these schools of fitness. You're seeing strongman, Olympic weightlifting, aerobic endurance, gymnastics, strength endurance, mindset. There's so many different elements of strength, conditioning, fitness. It's like, man, this is pretty cool when applied appropriately. But like, you could bastardize anything, right? You could be a bad podcaster. You could be a bad lawyer. You could be a bad doctor. You could be a bad CrossFit gym as well. And at the time, I just thought it was very fascinating coming from the university where you would think I would have had the other lens. But as, between a rock and a hard place, kind of seeing both sides, it was very fascinating to me, just the limited and the humble things that I got to see. I'm sure you got to see things in the weeds and in the depths and of the untangling of all those matters. But I think that's really cool that you got to play such a great role within that. And you were successful in protecting CrossFit and, helping CrossFit grow to, I believe, at the time, a handful of gyms up to like 15,000 locations and in over 150 countries, man.
It was wild to see the growth. And I mean,
that's fast and rapid and a ton. Wow.
Well, and it was very contrarian at the time because, one of the things that a lot of people to this day still don't understand is that the CrossFit model is not a franchise. And I don't know the story of where Greg chose to take a different path there, but from a legal structure standpoint, it's a limited license. Mm-hmm. And why that was so powerful is affiliates had the opportunity to stand up gyms and serve their local communities, right? It's not like you go to any like Wendy's or Burger King and they all look the same, right? But Greg had the foresight to realize that let's put these folks in their own communities to serve them. We're going to kind of give them some of the tools, but your communities better than big CrossFit did. So go forth and conquer, and it became very controversial too, where I don't remember what years it was, but as CrossFit really grew, there was a few times where there was two CrossFit gyms in one industrial complex. And the one who was there first would reach out to HQ and be like, can I get some protection here? I was here first. And HQ was like, no, whoever serves the community the best, that's where people are going to go. So, you have to figure it out, and the case, it was just insane. I mean, it was a incredible case study in scientific integrity. Mm-hmm. The case is resolved and it's confidential, how it resolved. But if you go back and look at the orders and what Greg was able to unearth there, with corruption during the peer review process, evidence destruction, we had, at least two federal judges, a state court judge, two state court judges, and a mediator say they've never seen anything like this.
Wow.
Never seen anything like it as far as the level of corruption, the evidence destruction, trying to use the First Amendment as a shield to hide kind of a commercial agenda, as you alluded to. And the most important thing is it was hurting the affiliate community, to your point, where there's people who aren't, bad apples, wherever you're at, there's bad apple Navy SEALs, bad apple Marines, bad apples everywhere, bad apple teachers. But for the most part, the community was doing the right things for the right reasons, and it hurt the affiliates. And so that was the commander's intent. Tell the truth, right? There's not a check they can write. Go out there and shine light on the truth. Greg said that light is the currency of victory. Go, right? And as a young
Cool.
as a young litigator, that's like a dream. Where it's like, okay, like let's roll and go do this, and unfortunately, things like shifted in CrossFit, and the case didn't wind up like we thought it would, but people have to move on, and it's a new time, and then COVID crept in, and there was a lot going on. But as a young litigator, it was really the opportunity, like a legal opportunity of a career for me, to be able to participate and lead a case like that to protect a community that I love.
Wow. Such a great description. What was it like working with Greg Glassman, right? Like, he's such an innovator, such a smart man. Yeah, he's made some mistakes like anybody, but you got to be a close confidant of his and kind of work, side by side with him. What was that kind of like?
Every time that I saw him, I'd always think he'd like wouldn't remember who I was or remember my name. I remember we met Jimmy and Greg at regionals with Dale, and then Marshall Brenner, who's a dear friend who came in as CrossFit's GC when Dale stepped down. A partner of mine, we met at Del Mar at regionals, and they told us about the NSCA case, and they're like, we want you to take it, go. And then, Jimmy and Dale and Marshall brought us over to Greg. And again, I always think he's not going to know who I am. He's like, Justin, what's up? And remembered what we spoke about last time, which I thought was super cool. And I haven't spent a ton of time with him, but the time that I have spent with him, I left inspired. I know there's a lot of stuff out there that people have spoken about. I didn't see any of that like a single time. And my marching orders were clear: protect the community. I would give them updates on the cases. And when I saw the I call it command presence that he has in front of a crowd, there was a stretch where HQ was doing these derelict doctors clubs, they were calling I think the C's clubs, but DDC. And we're bringing in some of the top doctors from around the world to really have an unfiltered conversation about the state of healthcare and what we can do to change it. And Greg's one of those few where he gets up and speaks and people listen.
Yeah.
He's just got that like visionary, like presence about him. And I always left humbled and inspired.
That's cool. I'd love to have a conversation with him on our podcast and kind of just like hear his journey within the space, just because, I don't know, it's kind of unique where I feel like CrossFit came out at a time where it was like very popular to specialize, and CrossFit specialty is not specializing. And then you look at the modern day world, it's like everybody is a brand. Everybody's an entrepreneur. Everybody, especially after COVID, is trying to have 15 different things going on because they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket if something like that were to ever happen again. CrossFit kind of teaches you that in a very subtle way, where it's like you can't just be a weightlifter and be strong. You also got to be able to breathe heavy and be good at the monostructural things, but also have skill, have technique, have accuracy. And I think there's something to that and how that kind of fits with where I'm at and where we're kind of taking these podcasts, which is really cool. When you were working with CrossFit, were you with Troutman Sanders at the time?
I was with Mintz Levin at the time. So Mintz was the firm. Mintz is a huge Boston-based firm, and they took me in after the Marine Corps and were really, really good to me. I think I was there for around 5 years.
Okay.
Then I followed my mentor to a firm, Troutman, that he went to, made partner, finished up the CrossFit litigation there. But at that point in time, I had really built a practice around protecting disruptive thinkers. I'm a litigator by trade, but really am more energized by building over breaking. And so I got to work with some really cool companies and technologies around the world. As Musselman knows, like, because I was pretty busy with CrossFit and other work, I just started bringing in my buddies as pro bono clients, and teaching early stage companies, especially veteran owned companies, how to build their businesses without the big firm price tag. I think that was one of the things that I never really aligned with, which was just the extraordinary price tag when the bills would go out. But was very lucky to spend, the majority of my legal career at two of the top firms in the world, learning from incredible attorneys and great training and resources. And it really shaped like a big part of how I'm able to, empower and protect the companies and communities that I'm still lucky enough to serve.
Yeah, you've really like developed into this very unique like business strategist by simply honoring your really, really well-practiced and well-developed skill of listening. I think you're a very, very good listener, and I think that served you very well. And now you've got your hands in a few different buckets, man. You're doing some really cool things, and we continually reference Joe Musselman, who is the founder of the Honor Foundation, and he's had some really amazing dinners where he's kind of brought us together in the same place. And I got to meet Poonacha Messiah, who is the CEO of the Chopra Foundation. And we actually had him on, I think, year one. Man, what an amazing conversation. I had so many messages in the social media world about that episode. I've re-listened to it like 5 times and I'm like 5 pages deep every time. Like, what did he say? How did he verbalize that? Like, such a peaceful man. And a lot of the really cool things that you guys are doing with the Chopra Foundation really align with my headspace a lot. And, how did you get connected with Deepak Chopra, and what are you kind of working on with those guys now?
So it was a Musselman connection where he was on a Veterans Day, I think a year or two ago, podcast with Deepak and Poonacha. And I totally agree with what you said about Poonacha. I mean, he's become a dear friend, and we'll be out at dinner and he'll say something. I'll be like, just please say that again. And I'll write it in my phone.
Yeah, for real.
It's so brilliant.
Yep.
But they mentioned to Joe they had a complicated, issue they needed fixed, and I had the opportunity to help fix it. And Poonacha, we had a quick call, and then he asked me to meet him for coffee the next morning. And so I did. And do you know Duke's in La Jolla?
Yeah.
Right there?
Yep.
So I never noticed this for as long as as many times as I've been there, but there's a little gate to the left of it. And so I'm like looking on my phone and think I'm lost. And then Poonacha just like open the gate and it's open. And so I go in and Poonacha's waiting there. And, there's just similar to when I met you and CJ, it's just one of those humans that Yep. You're going to be friends for the rest of your life. But he tricked me. So we walk in and there's a room full of people sitting around a table, beautiful, like glass window overlooking the cove. I think it's Claudio's CG Creative, amazing marketing company. We're sitting around the table. There's a seat next to Deepak. They're like, take a seat. So I start sweating and they're like, I have all these people staring at me and Deepak saying, tell us about you go. It's like, fuck. So I like tell my, my story and what I believe in. And Deepak smiles and gives me a hug and says, you're in. And I'm like, I'm in where? He's like, we want you to be our lawyer. And I was like, okay, like, let me think about it. Yes. And so, and then we went around the table and I met all of these superstars. Donna, she helped start the Bob Marley Foundation. I'm like, we need to have some wine so we can so I can hear some stories.
Yeah.
But, spent a year helping with some legal things here and there, and then had the opportunity, officially this week, to step in as a COO and help with their global mental health and veteran initiatives.
That's so cool. I just see you light up when you describe that a little bit. Ironically, I drove up to La Jolla to interview Poonacha, and it was sometime during the pandemic of 2020, so we were obviously trying to be respectful and abide by all the guidelines. And same thing, man, I parked there and I'm like, I don't really see any office space here. I'm not really sure where to go. And then this tall, handsome gentleman comes out very well dressed. And I'm like, we're here. This is the place. Let's go do it. And I'm setting up and I'm just looking. It's like these glass windows. You're looking out to this beautiful ocean scenery. Yes. The ambiance is so peaceful. And I'm setting up my podcast gear, sweating. And he's not really saying much. He's like, hey, would you like some coffee? And I'm like, no, I'm all good, man. And we have to this day, I think it's one of our most downloaded episodes.
Incredible.
Such an amazing conversation with him. He's such a great guy. And so after that original onset, you got to meet Deepak, you got to connect deeper with Poonacha, you got to meet Donna. What were some of the next things that came in that relationship?
We got to spend some time learning, about where the foundation was at and what was working and what wasn't working. Mm-hmm. And, and with most things in life, when I get cool opportunities, I just bring my friends with me. Yeah. And so
you are Vinny Chase.
There were, I'll take it. There were some needs that they had and wanted to meet people and was able to make some, meaningful connections for them. And they were very interested in kind of shifting the foundation's focus, a little bit more to communities that I care about deeply, veterans, neurodiversity and autism. And so started traveling a bunch with Poonacha and Deepak and meeting other folks in the community. And it just felt effortless, to help share my story and share their story. And then now I'm super excited about, the foundation's focuses for 2022. There's so many different modalities out there to inform our decisions, both from like a healthcare perspective, a mental health perspective. We look at kind of like the wearables evolution right now, neuroscience, and with like TMS and the tools to see our brain waves. We have the psychedelic renaissance popping up now as well. It's just a wild time to be alive. And I don't want to say that COVID's a good thing as a whole. That's too broad of a stroke. But I think one of the silver linings is it brought a lot of cracks that I believe had always been there to the surface.
Yeah.
We were forced to spend a lot of time with ourselves. And I think a lot of people, myself included, when it first happened, didn't necessarily love what we saw, and how I felt. And so now I feel like people are starting to see and feel. And once you see and feel it, you can't unsee it or unfeel it. What that track of, authenticity and purpose over profit can kind of feel like. And when I saw that someone at Deepak's level, the first thing I did was like call my mom. She's like, get out, like screaming on the phone.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. But him and Punacha, as you know, like from Punacha, they are extraordinary people. They're people first.
Yes.
And they smile and they're kind and they're generous and they just happen to say things that like change your life in like 8 seconds flat.
Did he have a saying when I was talking to him? I will never forget it. And it was also just the delivery in which he said it. I'm going to try to duplicate it right here. He goes, Bryce, we are human beings. We are not human doings. I was like, whoa, that is such a profound statement. Cause I was at a time where I was like, well, I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do that. And I was such an action taker. And he was like, stillness. And I was like, whoa. And it's such a profound thing because, that's not going to be valuable to everybody, but in that moment is what I needed to hear.
Yep.
And it was so powerful. And I think the Deepak Chopra Foundation is doing so many cool things. They pull in tech, they pull in, great conversations. They put out so much content and they really, create a tribe with amazing human beings. But at the root of all of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like you mentioned, like the wearables, you mentioned psychedelics, you mentioned tech and brainwaves and all these varying things, but they're listening. They're collecting the data points to try to steer people in, the direction that is fitting for them versus a one-size-fits-all model, which is something we've seen all too much of in the last decade. Like, what are some of what's your perspective on some of the like overarching missions of the Chopra Foundation?
Yeah.
And then your role in those missions.
Sure. I mean, I think, the focus for 2022 is going to be, there's going to be 2 big buckets. It's going to be using our resources and network to, to change really the script for mental health and longevity. And there's different components within there. And we're figuring out kind of which communities we're going to start, with really digging into. And when we look at something like kind of the staggering numbers around suicide, how do we change that? And, the numbers globally, locally are insane, especially in the veteran community.
Oh, yeah.
And what's really cool about how well-versed, with Punacha being a technologist and Deepak being Deepak is there's a unique opportunity to kind of synthesize all of these modalities down in a way that leads to actionable change, right? Not just like bells and whistles where it's one size fits all. How do we give people the tools to help improve their mental health and longevity? And like you said earlier, I think it's looking internally, right? It's creating that community of people who see us for exactly who they are. It's realizing that, okay, well, while we may not be able to catch like suicide in the moment, what are their precursors? Anxiety and depression, right? So what can we do to start chipping away at that? One of the foundation's initiatives, Never Alone, .love, if you check it out, one of the co-founders, Gabriella Wright, is an extraordinary human being. Actor, humanitarian. She was just in a movie with Ryan Reynolds and Samuel Jackson. She was like the bad girl in the Hitman Bodyguard's wife.
Oh, very cool.
One of the kindest people on the planet.
Oh, that's awesome.
And she lost her sister to suicide. And that changed, her life. And so now she's using her platform for good. It's The Leap. She made the leap to do that. And so we have an AI bot called Peewee. And Peewee was built to provide a kind of intermediary option for people to reach out and get help through technology without having to seek out a counselor.
That's very cool.
Or wait 3 months on a wait list and all those types of things. And we launched it a few months ago. We were hoping to have 20,000 interactions before the year end. We're up to 13 million.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible. It's so fascinating too, and I don't want to demean the artificial intelligence at all, but like looking back in the day, you think about Andrew Huberman talks about this dopamine relationship currently where, we love our phones because of the noise or because we see the notification. And back in the day, everybody was using AOL Instant Messenger. And, when your friends weren't responding, what do people do? They message Smarter Child, right? And like you're getting responses back, maybe they're not in direct correlation to things that you're saying. So it's still up and coming technology, but it's so fascinating now because I think people want to be heard, but more importantly, I think people want to be understood. And that's what you guys are providing. And it's from a convenient, but also very private resource where you can do it in the safety and convenience of your home from your phone or computer, where you don't have to necessarily feel like you have to share more than you're ready to share. And I think that's a lot of what it is. We talk a lot about, in mine and your conversations, presence and, creating a safe space. And sometimes you don't get that in a doctor's office. And it could have nothing to do with the doctor or the therapist or the psychologist or psychiatrist. Sometimes it's the parking situation. Sometimes it's, the weather. There's so many different triggers and things that come into, as factors and variables. But I think you guys are doing a really good job removing the barrier to entry. And then you're gaining insight into people's lives, which is also giving you guys insight as to how to update the technology. Like it's so fascinating to me. Can you kind of give people a little bit more insight as to like the actionables behind the artificial intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I have a pretty low tolerance for bullshit.
Yeah.
And so for me, if it's doing the right things for the right reasons, I stand behind it. And so on the AI side, there's a lot going on right now about like the ethics and morality behind AI. And, I surround myself with much smarter people, on that level as far as the coding goes and the algorithms and all of that. But what I do know is that our belief at the foundation is that it's not to replace people. There's human beings on the back end when those triggers are met. But right now there's huge opportunities being missed for those folks to reach out because they don't want to be seen walking into a doctor's office, or we've all had to deal with the shit show of urgent care in the ER. People aren't going to do that. So now when we take kind of our access to information in the palm of our hands through our phones, people can get on and anonymously get a little help as a bridge. And there's certain techniques that that are in there now and that we're refining as well for little things like breath work and, other modalities just to kind of like hopefully de-escalate a little bit. But when those triggers are hit, then there will be someone waiting on the back end, to support them. And, to bring it full circle about CrossFit, one of my favorite things that Greg said back in the day was that the needs of a grandma and Navy SEAL differ by degree, not kind. Right? Different, movements, but with different intensities and other things. And I feel like it's the same in mental health, right? There is that connective tissue between what a SEAL suffering from PTSD is going through versus a caregiver with a child with a disability.
Yep.
And now more than ever, like to your point about like dopamine and cortisol and blood panels that we can do, we're armed with more information than we've ever had in the past. But what I believe deeply in is it has to lead to actionable results, right? We just don't want repackaged statistics. It's cool to see, right? To have like a healthcare dashboard that tells you what's going on. And I do believe that like remote patient monitoring RPM is going to be a big part of the future. But I also think that the key right now is to use technology, to use AI and machine learning to give us actionable insight into like who we are, how to reach out for help, especially with something, as severe as potentially, taking your own life.
Yeah, that's a amazing hint into some of the things that you guys are playing with. Do you have any teasers? I saw briefly on your Instagram that you guys are working on some cool things heading into 2022 with the Chopra Foundation. Any teasers that you'd like to share with people?
Oh, let's see what I can share without getting in trouble. I think a big part of what we do really, really well is awareness. And, Deepak obviously has a really big platform. He just turned 75 and he's calling this his winter, his last season of service, which is inspiring and sad, at the same time. And so, when we look at some of these communities, that, that we believe are kind of like early adopters to facilitate change, we're trying to be pretty strategic on showing the rest of the world that if these top performers, need help, and are benefiting from it, like Navy SEALs, like the top surgeons in the world, like influencer entrepreneurs, then the snowball will move faster down the mountain. And so, we're working with several groups that will announce, probably early in the year, who are well-known names who are going to take the lead on the vulnerability aspect of like mental health and longevity in communities that you wouldn't expect to hear it from, right? Some of the top performers in the military, professional athletes. We have a really, really cool internal team that we're starting to work with to figure out how to really inspire change, to create awareness around it, to demystify certain treatment modalities. When I was a federal prosecutor in the Marine Corps, you cut your teeth on trying drug pops, zero tolerance in the military. And at the time, someone would come back from partying for a weekend and test positive for marijuana or something else. And it's very cookie cutter. You put on an expert and they testify, how much, THC is in the urine. And then, the Marine or sailor would say, oh, it was the marijuana or cocaine fairy, right? Or my buddy was smoking it near me. And then we'd have the expert come back and be like, well, sir, based on the levels, you would have had to have, been next to someone smoking 83 joints for 7 hours in a phone booth. So, we're going to like hoist the bullshit flag there.
Yeah.
And now going from that to this like life-changing event I was at this week by this organization, Vets, who's leading the charge on how psychedelics can change the game for suicide prevention for PTSD. And so I've been really getting into the weeds on the whole psychedelic renaissance. I'm really proud to learn more about it. And, and when I hear not just from, tier 1 operator veterans, but when I hear from their spouses that this is what changed the game, I know there's a there.
Yeah.
So, we're looking into, research, strategic partnerships, working with some of the best and brightest from, MAPS and that organization. And it's mind blowing. It truly is. And, I'm very passionate though about like destigmatizing the myths, right? Like this is not like a recreational, like, let's go party, situation. I mean, this is professionally led, deep healing. It's been happening for centuries.
Yeah.
And unfortunately now a lot of our like operators and folks navigating trauma have to go to South America or, or Mexico or elsewhere. But I think the US is catching up.
Yeah.
We heard from Rick Perry from Texas, Tim Ferriss, who's been incredibly brave about sharing his story and what it's like on there. Rick Dublin from MAPS. These thought leaders are so inspiring. But putting all the science aside, we also heard from, Chad Wilkinson was a really popular SEAL who took his own life. We heard from his spouse, when you see that level of loss and how something like that could have helped if, the government wasn't putting up roadblocks and was actually listening to science with integrity, I believe it's going to change the game.
Yeah.
But it has to be done carefully. It has to be done with thought. And getting back to what we talked about before, pretending that there's no suffering in life, in my opinion, is not realistic. Deepak talks about it a lot. He's written over 90 books. When you meet him, I can't wait to hear your feedback just on the energy and everything. But navigating that suffering and being present, I feel like we have to kind of recalibrate ourselves and realize that the secret isn't to get to a point of like pure like hedonistic bliss. It's to be able to realize and assemble the tools to navigate that suffering when it happens, right? When we get in a fight with our boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, to be a little bit less triggered, next time, to be kinder to ourselves after the fact. And so I'm super like energized and excited because there's kind of this perfect storm of information and opportunity and values colliding. And when we can have like brave Marine Raiders and Navy SEALs and, professional athletes share their stories and how it helps them, my hope is that using the Chopra platform, we're going to be able to inspire, the rest of us to be able to kind of follow suit and take better care of ourselves and the people we love.
Wow. I honor all of that. That's very, very motivating, inspiring, empowering, but you're granting the world permission to be vulnerable. And I think there's so much value within that. And then aligning that with top tier professionals to help steer the ship. and help provide perspective and awareness, and not necessarily telling people what to do or how to feel, but allowing them to feel, allowing them to have the human experience and be okay going through the wide range of emotions, but then more importantly, having the curiosity to wonder why, right? And then sharing those experiences. And you and I chat often around meditation and journaling and hot and cold therapy, and how those things allow you to really process and just be present and full of gratitude. And I think the awareness factor around presence and gratitude is something that is tremendously healing, and at the root cause of, a lot of this amazing innovation that you guys are coming out with. It's breath work, it's positive relationships, it's sunlight, it's trying to eat high quality foods, it's slowing down and sitting with your thoughts in the morning versus jumping straight to the phone. And, all these different value systems are now being, spread out like wildfires. And I think it's very cool because in my interviews and my studies and my readings, a common thread that we're seeing now is this psychedelic renaissance. I'm hearing it from Joe Rogan, from Aubrey Marcus, from, high level executives that we cross paths with, from, the likes of Tim Ferriss and a lot of the people that he's very fortunate to interview as well. And then, crossing paths with Trident Coffee and a lot of those guys. PTSD is real, but trauma is also real for recreational people. And having a way to purge, having an outlet, having a stream of consciousness that you can share with somebody else allows you to not necessarily bury all of that inside. And then eventually you can travel a little bit more lighter and live the life that you truly want to live, not the life that you think you're supposed to live. I don't know. Is that a good description of the psychedelic renaissance a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic one. And, what's coming up for me with it is no matter what our traumas are, whether it's combat related, with like PTS, or elsewhere in life with victims of sexual assault, about my journey that, rock bottom for me was navigating my son's autism diagnosis in those very, very difficult years, and how dark of a, and deep of a hole that I went down. I think that, those modalities that have been around forever with breath work and sunlight and hot and cold and psychedelics, authentic science is validating them now. And there's little things like, for example, a buddy of mine, Ned Mason, he's the COO over at Wave Neuroscience in Solana Beach. Him and a buddy, Sean, who's a fantastic human being, invited me to come in for a TMS. I think it's transcranial magnetic stimulation. And they're using it to heal trauma. And what it does is you go in for an initial, I think, 10 minutes, and it shows your brain waves. And so they offered like generously to do one for me so I could see, how all over the place I really am. And it was very telling, in terms of what was actually happening from a brainwave perspective before we even get to the stuff that probably led to some of the challenges there. But even more impactful for me is they know that, my son is on the autism spectrum, and they invited him to come in and do one. He thought it was super cool. And then when we got the readout, man, like I lost my shit, like crying, because, for years I had thought Caleb's challenges were purely behavioral, but what the TMS study showed is that his like brain waves before it even becomes a thought, right? That like software of the brain, the alpha state, like normal wave that we probably have right now chatting, is sandwiched between the brain wave associated with like that fogginess that before you go to sleep on one side. And then on the other, I think it's a beta wave, the one associated with irritability. Mm-hmm. So in his brain, and this is before we get to how it comes out, right? Things are packaged in between restlessness and fog, right? So when you hear about kids on the spectrum not having a filter, right, or kind of more of the like Asperger's kind of situation, there's a neurological component to it in addition to, everything else that goes into it. And so, we have more access to information now about showing how trauma shows up in our bodies. We talk about The Body Keeps Score.
Yep.
One of my favorite books of all time.
It's a really good one.
Unbelievable, like really drawing a powerful distinction between the mind and the brain, right? Mm-hmm. Like where does trauma live, and how come for so long, like we've got it so wrong, right? With how it's treated, and looking at things like, traditional talk, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's tough enough to get in there, because you have to, who's covered by your insurance provider. The good folks have like 3 or 6 months waiting lists, and that's a lifetime, to go by when you're navigating trauma. So what can we do in between to help people? And from what I'm seeing, and this is, I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions about psychedelics is it is not a Band-Aid for a gunshot wound, right? It is one of the many tools that help people unlock that hope, that happiness, right? Those things that were previously buried in there to really inspire action. Mm-hmm. And then you have to go and do something with it, right? You have to marry it with the meditation practices, with taking better care of yourself. But a lot of the naysayers think it's just like a one time and you're done. I don't think it's that linear for anything.
No, I don't think so either. It's a very misunderstood practice for sure. And I've never practiced or participated with the Psychedelic Renaissance, but I really, really am curious about it because it almost sounds like a catalyst. It almost sounds like something that people basically get to the point where they're brushing their teeth and they look themselves in the mirror and they're just like, I'm tired of living this way. I want to understand the why. I want to let go of the things no longer serving me. I want to hold on to the things that are serving me. And, I want to build deeper relationships with people versus this surface level. I have associates or I have people that are acquaintances. Like there's no value add to that or a limited value add to that. And I think the common thread that I pulled from all these people is just that this psychedelic renaissance can be an absolute game changer because it forces stillness. You can't have distraction when you're in that state. So it forces you to sit with you, your thoughts, the good, the bad, everything in between. And I think that you have so much courage in exploring that a little bit and sharing conversation and cognitive behavioral therapy with people that, have tons of experience in that world. And I think it's helping you navigate your experience with Caleb. And I really appreciated you sharing that. I know that's not an easy conversation to have, but it has sparked so much within your life and your career. And I think we had dinner, I don't know, like a year and a half ago, and you were kind of, figuring out what was going to come next. And now you've kind of started working a little bit with Spectrum Care Alliance, SCA, and that kind of directly relates to your experience a little bit with Caleb. I'd love for you to kind of unpack that a little bit for us.
Thanks, man. I think maybe 6 months before that dinner, I had kind of hit rock bottom. Caleb's mom and I are both litigators. They go to school in a very, a nicer district in San Diego, and it was a disaster trying to get him the resources that he needed. It was a constant battle with the school districts, and it kind of culminated where he made a comment about taking his life. And, as a parent, that's kind of as scary as it gets. And so, we kind of went on like high alert for everything. And at the end of the day, at that point in time, the school said, sorry, we can't put you in a different school or give you more resources. And here's why. And so we had what's called an IEP meeting with the district, and they were telling us why we couldn't get what he needed. And it was one of those defining moments where, his case manager had said something was the law. I had her iPad or her MacBook like connected to a screen. And I said, okay, like it's the law. This was being recorded. And I said, put it up on the screen. Like, let's take a look at what the law says. And then she turns white and the principal tries to like jump in and kind of like shush him. And I said, you said it was the law, show us. And she's like, well, it's more of a regulation. I said, okay, like pull up the regulation. And then again, they ask for a break, they come back in, and then magically we get what we wanted. Walked out of that meeting, went to my car and fucking sobbed. Not just because of what it took to get Caleb what he needed, but thinking about all of the other parents who don't know how to push back, and how to, thanks, man. And how to be a voice for their kiddos. And so that's where the company was born. I wanted to create a playbook for parents to learn from all of the dead ends that myself and so many other parents have run into over the years, using technology to teach them everything that I wish I would have known earlier on. Those years where I didn't know how to navigate his diagnosis, I didn't know how to share that with the people closest to me, my family, my friends. I'll never forget the day he was diagnosed where I was hoping he would have a good day. And we walked into this like shitty jail cell looking room. This woman walked in who was not kind. And like Caleb was like off the rails this is when he was like 2 or 3, off the rails from the beginning. Couldn't even do the test. Right. And that process was so isolating. And then after the fact, like it was like half the oxygen was gone from the room everywhere that I went, right? I was embarrassed because I knew it was going to happen around my family. Didn't go out a lot, started turning a lot more to alcohol and other things. And I think the like most lethal lie that I told myself was that I was alone. And, it wasn't until I went to Autism Tree Project Foundation's neuroscience conference, maybe 3 years ago, and got to hear from some pretty inspiring folks where, I decided to do something about it, and so now I'm like really lucky where I realized, number one, that I'm not alone. I've been so fortunate to meet so many parents who have said, thank you for starting to tell our story, right? You look at most parents where they're like suffering through another bouncy house party, for their kiddo. But what about when your kid's not getting invited to the parties, and the fear that comes from those types of things, especially dads, right? You look at the divorce rate for families, not just with autism, but with any child with a disability, and it's through the roof. There's a study that talks about cortisol levels in parents with a child with a disability. It's just as high or not higher, I forget what the exact conclusion was, of soldiers in Afghanistan. So I do believe that being a caregiver for a child with a disability is a trauma in its own right.
What do they call that? Secondarily affected a little bit.
Yeah. And, and I think a lot of it is fear-based and not having that community. But, when I started sharing more about my story and reaching out and meeting incredibly inspiring families and realizing that there's a way to kind of like harness and amplify the power of this community, built Spectrum Care Alliance and have, we're going through an accelerator right now, Founder Institute, who's been amazing. They're the world's largest pre-seed accelerator. They're helping us refine the vision. Our incredibly talented CEO and executive director, Dr. Jessica Taverniti, is like crushing it. And we're going to have this whole e-learning academy where it's going to be short and sweet to the point. Families are going to hear from a parent about whatever the particular issue is. What are the 2 or 3 things that I wish I would have known at that point in time, and what I done differently? Then we're going to have someone who's a global thought leader come in and help parents build their playbook. So for example, we partnered with Deepak. He's going to come in and teach the families how to take better care of themselves in those moments that are very, very difficult. And so, it has been probably the hardest chapter of my journey. Not proud of how I dealt with that for, the better part of a decade, but was very lucky, to be able to learn from others and be inspired by others and have the ability to actually do something about it.
Man, I am just so awe-inspired by your courageousness to share that, but more importantly, your courage to create actionable steps to not just help Caleb, but to go beyond the outskirts of your, family and your personal experience to think, okay, first learning lesson, I'm not alone, right? That takes a lot to kind of get to that point and realize that like somebody out there gives a shit. And I clearly do, and I'm going to find other people who do too. And then realizing and recognizing and not just viewing it from your lens, but from Caleb's lens, from other children going through this, from other families' lenses. That takes so much, maturity, really.
Man, I was driving Caleb to lacrosse practice the other day, and he is really proud of like SCA, Spectrum Care Alliance, and there was a really cute book that is he's in general education now with some additional support. He's so proud of him. But last year, his teacher did a book, and it was Why I'm Different, and they had every kid like in the class talk about why they're different. And then Caleb was the last page, and I'm Caleb Nahama. I have autism. It's difficult for me to, stay calm sometimes. I'm also a lacrosse player, love video games, surfing, and I'm the co-founder of Spectrum Care Alliance.
Yeah.
And it got published. And, when you help these kiddos find their superpowers, it's special, man. And they're there, and it's not like handout, pat, like they're there. And so driving to lacrosse the other day, the kids always see me working on PowerPoints and, the fun that I launched were looking at decks and building decks. And, I don't know if it's going to cause therapy down the road with my kids knowing how to build a deck, before like 10 or 11 years old for fun. But they've seen me and they've heard the conversations now working from home. And so Caleb's like, Dad, how do I talk to people about SCA? And I said, bud, you just like be you, right?
First and foremost, the wherewithal that be able to ask that question is dope. Like, that's so cool. I also think it's very fascinating, the ownership that comes with saying, hey, I'm the co-founder of something, right? Like, it's not an association. It's yours. So you take ownership of that. It's like when you live in an apartment, most people don't take ownership of the common area. They take ownership of their apartment.
Yes.
And then the common area gets destroyed. And I think that's really cool that you helped him recognize and understand that organically. And then I'm sure there was a lot of cool teaching points associated with that. And just the cognitive component of like, Dad, how do I talk to people about this? I think is a very, very great lesson to have, because communication is so fascinating. You and I have chatted about it a lot. I think I've said it a few times on varying podcasts, but like, you and I know this as a pen. We talked about it last time. It writes, but I could poke you with it. It could be a poking device. I could stab you with it. It could be a murder weapon, or I could use it as a bookmark. Well, how you communicate matters. Certain words mean different things. And for him to have those tools in his toolbox and understand how to communicate, use analogies like navigating, using things like, leveraging and painting a picture for people, I think that is one of the greatest gifts that you can, reward him with. And then what's he going to do? He's going to pay it forward. I think that's really, really cool, man. What are some of the other things that you guys are kind of doing with the Spectrum Care Alliance, and what's kind of your role with them?
Yeah. So, behind the scenes right now, my title is president, but really like helping build out the Parent Academy right now, and it's very difficult in the sense of, the analogy that I give folks is like, okay, if you're going to go climb like El Cap, right? And I gave you a map, you know what to do. It'd still be really, really hard. But you could do it, right? When you look at, and the mountain being parenting, right? Mm-hmm. No one gives you a map or playbook on how to parent, and it's really fucking hard.
Yeah.
And anyone who says differently, I would be suspicious of. But then when you have a child with a disability, it's like you get the map, the mountain's going to be difficult. You get to the first checkpoint and the whole mountain changes, right? And you still have the same map. Like, where do you go? What do you do?
Got to call an audible.
You do. And no one teaches you how to do that. No one's quarterbacking it. So when you look at not just autism, with any disability, all of the moving pieces that parents have to navigate, insurance, medical, behavioral, school, social, like the list goes like on and on and on. No one is zooming out and quarterbacking that. And so kind of how I'm spending most of my time right now is figuring out the content of these modules to make sure that it's digestible and actionable for families. We're building out a whole new comprehensive assessment, because right now with most disabilities, the kids get tested every year or two just to check the box to see if they're eligible. They don't meet the kids where they're at, right? Kids are changing so quickly each month, each year, that we're going to be providing these seasonal assessments to check in on what's working, what's not working right now, and then flip the script from being from being reactive to proactive, mm-hmm. right? So in the summer, talking about summer camps and options and resources, but also saying, hey, just so you know, we know you have a lot going on personally. School's coming up, right? Here's the things to start thinking about. On day one, here's what to ask for. We have an amazing team of advisors that we're building out with thought leaders from around the world, parents who are stepping up to give us impact, guiding us in terms of where they stumbled, what would have been helpful. The feedback has been invaluable and overwhelming in the best way. And so now we kind of have our roadmap in terms of what to do and how to help. And now we're building it. And it's super exciting. I know it's going to help a lot of families. And when we've spoken with other folks in the market who have been in the autism arena forever, they're like, this does not exist, right? No one comes in and tells you, how, what it's going to feel like with an autism diagnosis. That this is not like a necessarily solvable equation, right? This is going to impact you for the rest of your life. And that's hard shit to hear, but it's honest.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. I kind of had that false hope, which is one of the cruelest parts of the whole process. When your kid starts missing milestones early on, you're like, well, maybe the next one. And by that point, you've burnt a year where there could have been more resources and help. Really, really excited about kind of distilling down my lessons and all of the, feedback I'm getting to help parents kind of restore hope, so they don't hit the same tripwires that I did.
Wow. I'm so impressed, man. I think that providing a playbook is something that a lot of people need. I mean, I know for a fact, I think I spoke with Marcus Philly, and he was talking a lot about how he was pursuing medical school at first, and there's a roadmap for that. There is a playbook. There's, you have to do your undergrad, you have to do your biology, your physiology, and all those things, and then, your pursuit is this, medical school, and then residency, and so forth. The world of entrepreneurship, there isn't that. In the world of parenting, there isn't that. In the world of parenting, a child on the autism spectrum, there's not a roadmap for that. And there's a lot of complexities and nuances and challenges that you mentioned with insurance and with all these varying, life events. And I think it's very, very cool. I think this could be the start of something very special. It could be some sort of trend, because I think a lot of people, maybe alone isn't necessarily the right word, because you guys are providing avenues to help solve that. I think a lot of people are lost.
I think it's the perfect word, actually. I think alone is the perfect word, Bryce. And, we were chatting about Gabriella Wright earlier for the Chopra Foundation. The platform that she built with Punacha and Deepak is called Never Alone, right? That's where, part of where Peewee, that like AI platform is employed. And I do think it is the isolation and being alone that's the most debilitating.
Yeah.
And I think that I love the parallel that you just drew between like entrepreneurship and caregiving, because people don't want to talk about the hard shit, right? Or when they do, it's kind of like a quick badge of honor. I think it's one of the things that like Gary Vaynerchuk has done extremely well, right? He posts pictures of himself sleeping in airports and eating mac and cheese and all of the things. And that's why I love accelerators like Founder Institute, because they weed people out and fast, right? Like the cohort, my friend Mike Sherbakov brought Founder Institute to San Diego. It's the world's largest pre-seed accelerator. I think this cohort started with 28 or 29 companies. They're down to 18, 2/3 of the way through, right? And selfishly, I love that, because like as an investor, you want to know, like, most people have pretty sexy pitch decks at this, stage in the game, but who has the DNA of the team to execute, right? And to your point, the things that people don't want to talk about because it's perceived as weakness is usually where the magic lies. So for example, for entrepreneurs, who teaches them how to handle internal co-founder disputes? It happens all the time. If there's one common thread to the litigation that I saw in, the 15 years that I've been doing it, it's internal disputes that spilled over into something else. And, no one wants to talk about the prenup when you're getting married. But if things go off the rails, you're very glad you had one, And so it's not that it has to be about the prenup if things go wrong, but I think that there's a lot of work that we can do to give people more of like a realistic expectations about what this is going to be like, things to keep an eye out for. And if there's one theme of it all, it's how do we change the whole kind of like reactive pattern that's been happening to being more proactive and helping people look around corners, not just externally, but what we've been talking about internally as well, right? How can we anticipate, not just the why that you mentioned, and love Simon Sinek. He and Start With Why and the Golden Circle have played a huge role, like in my, and we partnered with him with the Honor Foundation as well. But a Green Beret buddy of mine, Derek Goretz, total stud, very brave, sharing about his kind of like psychedelic experiences. He connected me with his buddy, Dimitri. We spoke. Dimitri studied under Bruce Lee. Very, very impressive guy. And like he got me in like 5 minutes flat, was getting to like really heavy shit. So going with it. And I said, you know what, this is amazing. Like, I don't know if you know Simon Sinek. He's like, of course I do. He's like, but you know what? He's like, what's more interesting than the why, the how, and the what? He goes, the who. He goes, which version of us is showing up in a particular moment? And that blew me away, because when we look at kind of the chronology of our lives and childhood stuff that impacts us and other traumatic events kind of that happen throughout of our life, I don't believe it's the same us that shows up in each moment. Like, yes, literally it's you or me. But internally there's different versions of us. Yeah. And, there's a treatment modality in psychology, integrated family systems. And one of the things that I love about it as it talks about there's parts of us. And I think you and I talked about this earlier as well. But rather than when you're in an argument, not you, when anyone's in an argument with their significant other or the kids or whatever, if you say, I hate you, that's like shit. That's like a nuclear option there, right? But what about saying, listen, a part of me is really upset with you right now, not the whole thing. And just that little tweak like decompresses the like velocity behind what's going on in the moment. And when you're in the moment, I think it's very difficult to like apply these tools on the fly, which is what circles back to the whole concept of it being proactive, right? How do we let people know that these resources are there? So when they're in the moment and they are tested, one of my favorite lessons that I learned from you is when Jade, my daughter, broke her leg. I think I had to cancel a dinner we had. Not only were you so incredibly accommodating, but it was like a one-line text saying, this is why we train. Right. And it's so fucking true. Those moments where we're pushing our limits and learning how to be kind to ourselves when we do get tested, that's when it matters most. Right. When you look at books like Stealing Fire by Jamie Wheal and Flow State with the top performers in the world, there's no like secret, right? They didn't like wake up that way. It's countless like repetitions and working their asses off. When you watch a, team of like SEALs like clear a room, there's a guy who I grew up admiring a ton, Rourke Denver. He was an act of valor, wrote a few books. I'm lucky enough to work with him and his business partner, David Janke, on a company called Team High Ground right now, really redefining peace of mind and safety for families. And he talks about it because he lived it for, 20 years as a SEAL commander, about you can be in a dark room and he knows where his teammate is, right? You just know these things, but it's not because of some like, one hit wonder, we showed up and it worked that way. It's because of hard fucking work.
Yep. You are involved in so many things and your brain draws so many parallels so fast and so many wide analogies that are always so relevant. How do you compartmentalize each one of these varying buckets? There's a commonality there. There's common themes. There's common mantras. There's common problems that you're trying to solve. How do you differentiate each one of these buckets that you're involved with? Do you practice the AMRAP mentality from CrossFit where like, hey, 2 hours on this block, small little break, 2 hours on this block? Like, how does the mind of Justin Nahama kind of process all of these varying things that you get involved in?
I think it's always a work in progress. I don't have it figured out. Constantly holding myself accountable and refining. I think kind of where we started our whole conversation was you shared my why, about empowering and protecting others so they can unapologetically be seen and celebrated for exactly who they are. Once I got the courage to take my leap and start making choices aligned there, that's my litmus test, and things that allow me to do that are usually a hell yes. And I think setting expectations up front. Right? Like, I get that comment all the time. How are you juggling all these things and continuing to deliver? I think it's because of the intentionality around what I'm promising to deliver. And, you know me well enough to know that I'm not like an under-deliver type of guy. But it's not easy. It's not easy to manage. And one of the things I'm trying to get better at is being more present for the kiddos and myself and my family. My baseline is skewed because of the, billable hours at a big law firm it's a cruel existence to look at your life in 6-minute 0.1 increments. So when I look at how much time I was spending in that kind of, I'll call it misaligned, primarily business without as much emphasis on purpose environment, it was soul crushing. I'm probably just as busy right now, but I'm energized and I'm inspired, and I'm a very different version of myself the past year and a half for my kiddos. You can ask them. They'll Jade and Caleb.
I can feel it.
Jade and Caleb will tell you unfiltered. But I'm elevating, and so, it's difficult sometimes because you have to make hard decisions and be accountable for, I call it kind of like the pie chart of time every day. You take someone like Deepak and he sleeps for 8 hours a day. He meditates for 8 hours a day and he works for 8 hours a day. Doesn't miss a beat ever. That's like gold standard, like, not even close to that. But for me, it's when I look at my pie chart of the day, every month reflecting, we're all going so fast, and have all those distractions where every Sunday I carve out an hour to hold myself accountable and take ownership of what worked, what didn't work. What could I change? What could I do better? I don't think that, whatever the Churchill and Mike Tyson quotes are about like everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face, and then Churchill with, the plan is useless, but the process of planning is everything, or whatever the quote is. For me, I find that I've tried to like plan my days in weeks where this day's for this, that day's for that, but you miss things. You miss things. I remember when I was learning how to take depositions and do cross-examinations, I'm a big like outline guy for going into those things. But the best piece of advice I got was you have to listen, to what the witness is telling you, because they're going to give you these nuggets and you have to go down those roads. And I feel like it's the same thing internally. I have to hold myself accountable, take ownership of what I got wrong and what I got right. And I'm just like everyone else going to mess things up. But I feel like with this chapter, because the four, ways that I'm really spending my time right now are so aligned, it's a gift, right? It's a gift to have that problem, to figure out like how I continue to do justice and honor the community that I promised to serve. And it feels effortless. It really does. The days fly by, and it's a whole different, atmosphere right now, with those days that fly by, meeting extraordinary people and trying to kind of connect the dots so, others can kind of be the best versions of themselves.
You don't work anymore, you play.
Yeah.
All these things are energizing for you. And all of them have kind of served a very unique purpose too, where you've developed leadership and business strategy expertise. People lean on you to consult and serve as, advisory councils to a lot of these very successful companies. And you're also a part of the Veteran Fund, which tells me that, there's a monetary component that you are involved in as well. And sometimes those money style conversations are difficult, right? Like you're doing all these things, for the last hour and a half, we've talked about impact and problem solving and regulating emotions and vulnerability. But at the end of the day, you still have to pay your bills, and you still want to provide avenues to help other people monetarily as well within all these different, buckets that you're involved in. So what has that business side of things been kind of like, and how have you developed the wherewithal on the financial side of things?
So historically, that has been one of my biggest blind spots. I have a blind spot and a weird relationship with money. My parents used to argue over it a lot. When I transitioned from government work to private practice and the bills went out and I had to send clients, bills, they had questions, very, very uncomfortable for me. But what I started to gather kind of the hard way over the years by representing a bunch of foundations and the nonprofit space, and then some like very, very large, not just the CrossFits of the world, but other like global companies, publicly traded companies that I had the opportunity to come in and help like protect or grow. I believe that there's a change, and it gets back to the conscious business that we were talking about. The traditional Rockefeller-ish like business concepts are you cut costs and reduce margins, but that usually has an impact on people. When you talk to folks who are burnt out in the private equity model, it's the same thing. They come in with a distressed asset and they cut costs and then, sell it. I think on the fund side, I've spent time in the venture space. I've worked with a ton of startups over the years. I've been fund counsel to funds and, watched Musselman crush it with his fund as well, and learned from some really, really smart people in the venture space, and opportunities that I've had in the past to dip my toe in the venture world, just didn't feel aligned. And so when I had the opportunity with Ryan Micheletti and Mike Sherbakov and Lisa Song-Sutton to create the Veteran Fund, values were aligned. We're sitting above Founder Institute, which I mentioned before. Ryan he's a guy you should have on the podcast. Mike and Lisa too. I'll share more about their backgrounds offline. Cool. But Ryan has really led the charge to help build veteran-led and veteran spouse-led companies over time through his veteran accelerators. And so what we're doing with the fund is we're bringing in veteran spouse, or kind of dual use companies. They're going through Founder Institute to get those resources to kind of refine, their plan to build and execute and protect their vision. And then we're writing first checks. Super excited about it, and there's risk in venture, and, there's upside for the partners and myself, as well. But I'm unapologetically excited about it because we get to do good. We get to make money in the process for ourselves, our investors. There's a book I think I mentioned to you called The Healing Organization. Unbelievable. We did a strategic planning retreat with our Chopra team, and this incredible crew, New World Ventures, that we were lucky enough to learn from. They bring in these folks that they call genies, and the genies are like the subject matter experts in the field. Yeah, it's a term from David Stillman, like New York Times, like, best-selling author. So they brought in this incredible woman, Karen Yanis, who helped build Oprah's foundation.
Oh, wow.
And that's like the gold standard. Like if you look at their Charity Star Navigator rating, it's like 100 out of 100. And she gave us all these really cool tips about conscious business. And the New World team gave us this book, The Healing Organization, and it talks about how difficult, nonprofit life is, right? And the reach of, of the scope of your impact. And you look at Honor Foundation or all these other world-class foundations, they're spending a lot of time raising money, not necessarily like on the mission. Our CEO, when Joe stepped down, he's still, on the board and, focusing on his fund and a bunch of other things. But our CEO right now, Matt Stevens, was a SEAL Team 6 officer, one of the most impressive and humble human beings I've ever met. He's spends a lot of time on their own fundraising, right? And I would rather see him on a whiteboard, figuring out how to create even more impact. But that's just the reality of a lot of the nonprofit space. And so when we look at how can we create more impact through like conscious business and folks who have aligned values and they have those difficult questions, or conversations like beforehand, to me, there's an opportunity to do a lot more good there. And so that's why the Veteran Fund for me came into focus like very, very quickly, because like I shared earlier, we argue well together. I think we start off every conversation when we're making decisions as a team. I'm happy to be outvoted, and that's the truth.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so, it's just, again, like, our secret sauce has to do with our relationship with, Founder Institute and our deal flow. But the real secret sauce is, I think, the DNA of the team, and that values alignment, our vision and our why behind it. We all are veterans. Lisa comes from a military family, and we know that we can collide these worlds of, venture and technology with giving veteran companies that boost. And you mentioned it earlier, that recent Forbes piece was killer, about why there need to be more veteran companies. And so, we're going to close on our first raise soon.
Congratulations.
Knock on wood, like everyone who we've talked to has said yes and is in. Very, very validating about the platform. But most importantly, we're going to have the opportunity to, stand behind these veteran and veteran spouse companies, to help give them that initial boost and believe in them out of the gate so they can, inspire and leave their mark on the world.
That's really cool. With you being relatively new to the fund space a little bit, at least from the practicing side of things.
As a GP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it like, when you get the verbal confirmation? Is there a pseudo-cognitive hesitation around, are they actually going to write the check? I can't overpromise and underdeliver, to these people over here until we get the deliverables over here. And then on that same subject matter, what role does money kind of play in regards to all of the things that you're doing, right? So money, from my humble opinion, plays a little bit of a role to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit, help support a few things, open a few avenues, help open a few doors. I'm very curious as to your cognitive thought process and the advice that you would give to people.
Sure. Let me take the first question first. I think that anytime that you are responsible for someone else and have a moral or fiduciary duty, it comes with great responsibility. So when we get those like checks in for folks, like, hell yeah, it's scary, in the sense of like, we have a responsibility to do what we promise we're going to do to make them more money. But we're all, and create the impact that they want to see. And so, but I think what matters is what you do with that, right? Like, we're all experienced enough. And this is another reason why the DNA of our team works really well is we all bring different expertise to the table. We all kind of have different superpowers that create this like little pieces of rope that are one bigger strand of rope and much harder to break, and so it works. But, we take that super seriously, taking someone else's money. There's legal obligations that come with it. For me, obviously I know the legal side of things, but I'm not going to let the people down who are really betting on me, whether it's for the autism company or for the fund. I mean, there's endless funds they could, invest in, but the people that I call up and ask are betting on me, and I take that super seriously. But it energizes me. Like if I go down, I'm going down guns blazing.
I like that.
Yeah, so it excites me more than anything else. The second part of your question, I think, is more difficult, right? Like, how does money impact things? And I've been very lucky enough over the course of my life to see like extraordinary, billionaire wealth, all the way down to, having fear of, what meal is coming, next. And, there's probably countless books and people who are way smarter than I am to talk about this, but just where I come down on it is that I think it is negligent to not acknowledge that if there is financial stress, it's going to be distracting. Right. It's going to be distracting from everything that you do and limit your potential for happiness, your potential to be curious, your potential to create. And a lot of folks, myself included, like they don't really teach that in college, right? Or high school or anywhere else about real financial wellness. It's kind of that dopamine cycle you talked about before, is we're kind of always taught to like chase the drug of more. I want more, I want the shiny object. And when you look at some of like Lisa Song Sutton's content or her business partner, Cody Sanchez, they talk about, they're so vulnerable about like, yeah, when we like first started to crush it and get 7 figures in the bank and we bought the dumb shit, like all it did was increase our debt to income ratio, but it didn't lead to happiness. And I've seen that firsthand. And so for me, the way that I think about it is I want to operate from a place of accurate information. So, and I'm not proud it took me so long to get here, but like 2 years ago, I hired an amazing financial planner to like no bullshit tell me, here's your like just getting by number, here's a pretty good year number, and here's a great year number. What I chose to do is, for myself, is create a scenario where I'm in between that first and second tier, so I'm not stressed out. And rather than chase the short-term cash, because one of the other great pieces of advice I got is like, wealth does not come from a salary. Mm-hmm. It comes from equity and investments and other things. I've chosen to free up my time to take on more risk with equity in certain things, and this was before the fund. But I think people need to operate with accurate information. What their family needs. You should know that once you hit that number every month, how much money is left to invest. Is for play money. I cannot believe how many folks like haven't had that difficult conversation with a financial planner to really understand what their needs are, and that was life-changing for me. I think the other piece is really getting accurate information where I thought that equity was much sexier than it really is. Folks advise or consult, and they're like, I want equity. But if you look at the numbers, 9 out of 10 startups fail, like outright. Yeah. So equity may not be the play. And then it's also very different based on the technology, right? Like an individual's like coaching company is not necessarily scalable. And so if I was consulting for one of them, I would probably ask for cash, instead of equity, compared to like a tech company that can be scaled. And Founder Institute has these really, really cool metrics. I don't know if you can like put stuff up when you publish this, but I'll show you them. And it talks about the growth cycle and kind of the numbers, like the EBITDA that companies have to hit, when they're about to get acquired to get that equity payout. And so, I've been learning this the past like 7 or 8 years as I started to do more in the venture space, as I saw, friends have exits, and what it looks like and feels like. And a lot of friends fail, and myself included. Like there's been horses I've bet on that didn't win, and it's part of the process. But I think kind of like demystifying it and operating with accurate information and not thinking, how all the legal stuff, works about getting equity, learning what it is and what it's not is super, super important. So, I think at the end of the day for me, it's one, like, yes, financial freedom is incredibly important to me. And I'm in a new chapter figuring that out now, where for the past 2 years, I've stepped away from chasing a higher salary to making sure I prioritize what my family needs. And then also taking on opportunities that will lead to more of like a wealth event, opportunity, through having equity in companies through the fund, but it's different for everyone.
Mm-hmm. It's a very elaborate description, but I think it's also very cool, like the vulnerability to be like, here are my spending habits, and communicating that to your financial advisor to help devise a plan and not necessarily say, this is what you have to do, Justin, but more importantly, hey, here are 3 varying tiers. You decide the lifestyle that you want to live. And that way you have options, and you clearly made one that works well for you, at least in this chapter in your life for now.
If you want to build a company together, like I think we should build a dating app, and I think that it should be based on the last month of someone's Amazon purchase history. We could do like
so good.
We could do like an algorithm of like what's aligned there, or like the ad targeting lately is like killing me in a good way. I'm just like, they know me so well. But it's easy. It's easier than ever to spend, and I think if there's one kind of secret sauce aspect to it, it's really just accountability.
Yeah.
Because those little things add up, and most people don't want to kind of like face the fire or the dumb shit that we're spending money on. And the book I mentioned earlier, Stealing Fire, they talk about this concept of the altered states economy.
Oh.
And they quantify in a really powerful way all of the things that we dump money into that are distracting us from being present. Things like, why are we waiting in line for coffee and spending $3 or $4 a pop at Starbucks, on alcohol socially? And the thesis isn't like, don't do that. It's just like, be aware, right? Be aware of, with the social media and other things like that. And so, pretty powerful stuff when we actually have like full transparency of our spending habits and how we choose to spend our time.
Such a common theme for today is awareness. So much awareness can kind of help lead us down the right path. But more importantly, you've dropped so many books in this episode. People are going to be spending their entire last month's paycheck on Amazon buying all these books. Do you have time to read the actual books? Do you audiobook in the car? Are you a Blinkist guy? Like, how do you gather all this information, and then how do you allow the information to kind of stick?
Yeah, I'm trying to get into audiobooks. I'm not great at them. I tend to kind of like get distracted in my thoughts. I've used Blinkist in the past, but for a specific purpose. Like, I'm much more of an old school. I don't have a Kindle. I like to turn the pages, and I like to finish it and mark up the book.
Yep.
A good friend, Shiv Shukla, told me about Blinkist, and I kind of like called bullshit initially. I was like, all right, there's no way to get like the gist of like, a really good book in 15 minutes or 13 minutes or whatever it is. And so I was like, but I'll try it. And so I took a few of my favorite books and did the like Blinkist version of it, and was really blown away by the gist of it. What I use Blinkist for is if there's a new like technology or area of the law or business that I know nothing about, rather than, reading 10 regular books, I'll blow through 20 Blinkists on them just to listen while I'm driving, to speak a little bit more intelligently about it, like to my clients, to try to learn.
Blockchain, NFTs, cryptocurrency, we're going Blinkist.
You took the words out of my mouth. You did. And then, and then I'll always ask my friends and clients who are in the space, like who really know it, saying, what are the 1 or 2 books I need to read on it? Like, we did something for this like quant fund, like an algorithmic investing fund. And I didn't even know that was a thing, right? So the founder gave me 2 books to read, and read them outright. And it was great, right? A little over my head, but like, it was interesting. Now, just to, ask more informed, I would say to inform my curiosity, I use Blinkist, and I found it as a very valuable tool. And then once in a while, like, if I'm burnt out, I'll listen to like a self-help book on there or something. But for most of those things that I'm personally interested in, I tend to go to the like old school, regular book. And that is also what I've learned, a barometer for my mental health. So if I have enough in the tanks to read for half hour, an hour at the end of the night, I did something right, planning wise.
That's cool.
And when I'm not reading, I know that I haven't done a good job planning, for myself, or, it's not all linear, where sometimes, you just need to go to sleep earlier. But that's a pretty good litmus test for my day, if I still have enough in the tanks after the kids go to bed to read for a half hour.
I like that as a little bit of a time and fill your cup regulator. That's rad. You're also involved in Fisher Broyles, man. Like, I don't know how you do what you do. What's kind of your role with them, and what are some of the cool things you're working on there?
So, we talked earlier about how I kind of stumbled into the whole like lawyer opportunity, but kind of found that alignment with my why, with empowering and protecting people in that lane. And, started off as a federal prosecutor for the Marine Corps, and spent a lot of time with special victim families, sexual assault, loss of life, and very rewarding, but super heavy. And, I was trying cases that I probably had no business trying as a young prosecutor, but had amazing mentors who taught me a ton about trial practice and did pretty well. But when I looked at people who'd been doing it for the career, they were understandably pretty like desensitized to it. And I didn't want that. I knew it was time for a change. And so I went to work at Mintz, which is a big international firm, and came up there as an associate, and then, followed my mentor as a partner to another traditional big law firm. And again, learned so much, but, big law firms are about the bottom line, and some are better than others. And I was very lucky to spend almost a decade at two firms with like amazing people who did take care of their teams. But at the end of the day, it's a big company, and they're judged based on the profits, not necessarily the purpose. And so I felt misalignment there. And Fisher Broyles seemed a little too good to be true at the time. The way that the firm works is it's the largest, they call it distributed, but it just means virtual law firm in the world. And if you spent just around a decade at one of the top firms in the world, a public company, general counsel, or as a federal prosecutor, they invite you in. And because we're virtual, we don't have the overhead of the like swanky offices and statues.
Yep.
So our rates are pretty much half of what they were at the big firms that we came from. So clients dig that, they dig that. And, the firm was founded in, I think, 2002 and went gangbusters for growth during COVID. Now we have over 300 partners around the world. And
cool.
It's a really, really awesome platform to practice under, because in addition to just like the lower rates, the leadership of the firm kind of had the foresight to realize that, okay, we're not going to like squeeze our partners for minimum billable hours. So from my perspective, it incentivizes trust. Like our comp is formulaic, so we don't have equity. We don't have to put together what I like to call the hero memo at the end of the year, talking about how awesome you are, to get your salary or your bonus. You know what you're getting, and if you don't perform, you don't get paid. And so because there isn't that minimum billable hours for me, the past few years, I've transitioned from more of a like in the trenches litigation role to more of a fractional general counsel role. So, I say no more than I say yes, just because I really care about having that values alignment for what the company's doing. But the platform's been amazing for me to play that general counsel role, outside general counsel role, for different companies in the, technology and wellness and crypto ecosystems, and build and manage, teams of folks way smarter than I am, in their particular expertise. Like use blockchain, for example. Right? It's a newer area of the law, and we have 2 or 3 folks, Adam and Lara and some others at our firm who are global thought leaders on it. I couldn't read enough books to ever get up to speed on what they've done, and so I'm lucky enough to build and stack the teams with not just people who can do the law side technically, but understand the intersection of business as well, right? And are looking around that next corner and aren't incentivized to like upsell someone the, Ferrari of patents when they would have been just fine with the like steady Honda Accord.
Yeah.
So I think the firm's done an awesome job of bringing in the right people, because they kind of articulate their value proposition, and they incentivize, and reward the right behavior, which is delivering.
I think it aligns really well with you too. Pursuing impact, really trying to do the right thing when nobody's watching. And I admire that in all the different things that you're doing, man. Like, we're going to have to do more episodes to kind of unpack all the things that are going to continue to unravel and evolve in 2022. What's kind of next as we close out, 2021? What are you kind of working on, and what's a focal point for you?
I think step one is I've learned the hard way, and I don't know if the audience can tell from the frame, but my toenails are silver right now because I went and took my daughter, who's 9, for a pedicure, and realized that toenail polish does not come off in the shower. So I think step one is to clean myself up a little bit. And then step two is really just what I was talking about before, to reflect on this year, what went well, what didn't, make the necessary adjustments. The Chopra Foundation opportunity is newer. And so you get one shot to make a first impression, and for me, step one, in every chapter of mine that you could call successful, it's been to surround yourself with smarter people. And so I'm about to be making some phone calls to build out different advisory committees, to help us grow and hear from people who have lived and breathed in those communities without making assumptions. And then just to hopefully continue to, inspire folks to take that leap that we talked about.
I love that.
And I'm super proud of you too, man. Like I remember when we were chatting about, your own leap and transition and watch you grow the podcast over time. Like it's scary as hell. And there's difficult moments and there's wins, but once we step into kind of like, our superpowers, it's a whole different equation.
That's very cool, man. We're honored to have you on today. And as we wrap things up, my favorite conversation to have with people at the tail end is if you could have a billboard and share a little slogan with the world, what would you like that billboard to say?
Be you.
I love it. I love it. Inspiring people to be unapologetically themselves. There you have it today, guys. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and sharing so much about all the amazing things that you're involved in. You truly are a global thought leader, and I'm just so honored to be able to call you a friend. If you enjoyed my conversation with Justin today, guys, please rate, review, subscribe on all platforms that you listen to podcasts. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Take care, guys. Until next time.